The night presses heavy against the jungle canopy. In the darkness of southern Veracruz, where the air hangs thick with moisture and the calls of howler monkeys fade into silence, something ancient watches. Mist rises from the river valleys, curling around roots and stone, and in that vapor-thin boundary between earth and sky, colossal faces emerge. They are carved from basalt, dark volcanic stone that drinks the moonlight rather than reflecting it. Each head stands taller than a man, broader than a doorway, weighing tons upon tons. Their eyes are wide, their lips full and solemn. Some wear what appear to be helmets, ribbed and ornate. Others bear expressions that shift depending on the angle of shadow, serene in one moment, troubled in the next. No inscriptions explain them. No names are carved into their cheeks. They simply exist, half buried in soil that has swallowed empires, watched over by trees whose roots have cracked pyramids and temples into rubble. The stone heads are silent sentinels of a world that flourished and fell, long before the Maya built their great cities, long before the Aztecs dreamed of Tenochtitlan. This is the realm of the Olmecs, a civilization so old that even the ancients considered them ancient. Their cities rose in an age when bronze was still new to the world, when the Shang dynasty ruled China, and the pharaohs of Egypt's new kingdom were only beginning to fade. Yet here, in the humid embrace of Mesoamerica's Gulf Coast, a people built monuments, carved gods into stone, and laid the foundations for every civilization that would follow. But who were they? What drove them to haul multi-ton boulders across swamps and rivers? What visions filled their minds as they shaped human faces from volcanic rock with tools of stone and patience? The jungle offers no answers, only humidity, birdsong, and the patient gaze of stone. The colossal heads wait as they have waited for millennia, holding secrets that the rain has not yet washed away. To understand the Olmecs is to first understand their world, a realm defined by water, heat, and the constant pulse of life erupting from rich volcanic soil. This is the land between the Sierra Madre Mountains and the Gulf of Mexico, where rivers carve serpentine paths through lowland jungles and seasonal floods reshape the earth with every passing year. Picture the landscape as it must have been 3,000 years ago. Mangrove swamps stretch endlessly along the coast, their roots tangled like the fingers of submerged giants. Inland, the ground rises gently toward volcanic slopes, where basalt formations jut from the earth like the bones of sleeping gods. Between these extremes lies a mosaic of wetlands, forests, and savannas, an ecosystem so abundant that it could sustain large populations without the need for extensive agriculture. The rains come with apocalyptic intensity. During the wet season, storms roll in from the Gulf with thunder that shakes the ground, lightning that splits the sky into fractured brilliance. Rivers swell and overflow, transforming the landscape into a vast network of channels and temporary lakes. The earth becomes saturated black and rich, and from it springs a profusion of life. Cacao trees with their bitter pods, wild maize growing in clearings, palms, heavy with fruit, and rubber trees weeping latex that hardens into bouncing spheres. This abundance shaped Olmec culture in profound ways. Unlike the desert civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia, where scarcity demanded rigid organization and constant vigilance, the Olmec homeland offered plenty. Food could be gathered, hunted, and cultivated with relative ease. But this generosity came with a price. The same rivers that nourished the land could destroy settlements in a single night. The same fertility that fed populations also bred disease, decay, and the relentless encroachment of jungle vegetation that consumed anything left unattended. In this environment, the Olmecs learned to read the rhythms of nature with precision. They tracked the movements of stars to predict floods. They understood the cycles of cacao and maize, the habits of jaguars and caimans, the properties of plants that could heal or poison. Their art reflects this intimacy with the natural world. Jaguars merge with humans, serpents coil through their religious iconography, and the earth itself becomes a living, breathing entity worthy of reverence. The land gave them stone, water, and sustenance. In return, they carved the land's essence into monuments that have outlasted empires, creating a dialogue between human ambition and elemental power that still resonates in the shadows of their abandoned cities. In the grand narrative of human civilization, certain cultures stand as foundational pillars: Sumer in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley in South Asia, the Shang in East Asia. In Mesoamerica, that distinction belongs to the Olmecs. They are, by archaeological consensus, the mother culture of a region that would later birth the Maya, Zapotecs, and Aztecs, civilizations whose achievements would astound Spanish conquistadors and puzzle scholars for centuries. The Olmec rise began around 1200 BCE, though their origins likely stretch back even further into the mists of pre-ceramic cultures that left little behind but pottery, shards, and stone tools. By the time their civilization reached its zenith, they had established sophisticated urban centers that functioned as hubs of political power, religious authority, and artistic innovation. 3 cities dominate the archaeological record: San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. Each represents a different phase of Olmec development, a chapter in a story that spans nearly 1,000 years. San Lorenzo emerged first, around 1200 BCE, as a planned ceremonial center built atop an artificially modified plateau. Its architects didn't simply build on the landscape, they reshaped it, creating terraces, drainage systems, and monumental plazas that suggest a society capable of mobilizing massive labor forces. The city's influence radiated outward through trade networks that reached as far as modern-day Guatemala and central Mexico. La Venta rose to prominence as San Lorenzo declined. Around 900 BCE, built on a low island in a coastal swamp, it became the spiritual heart of the Olmec world. Here, architects erected a massive pyramid complex aligned with celestial phenomena, surrounded by plazas where colossal stone heads stood guard. Jade offerings, buried in intricate mosaic patterns, filled ceremonial caches. The city's layout suggests a cosmological blueprint, a physical manifestation of Olmec beliefs about the structure of the universe. Tres Zapotes represents the final phase, lasting until around 400 BCE. By this time, Olmec culture was already fragmenting, its influence dispersing into the cultures that would succeed it. Yet Tres Zapotes preserved essential elements of Olmec tradition, including what may be the earliest long-count calendar date in Mesoamerica, a system of timekeeping that would become central to Maya civilization. But the Olmecs were more than builders and artists. They developed systems of ritual governance that blended political authority with religious power. Their rulers presented themselves as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, capable of channeling the power of gods through elaborate ceremonies. This model of divine kingship would echo through every subsequent Mesoamerican civilization. They established long-distance trade routes, bringing jade from the highlands of Guatemala, obsidian from central Mexico, and ideas from cultures hundreds of miles away. Their artistic motifs, the were-jaguar, the feathered serpent, the rain god, spread throughout Mesoamerica, appearing in later cultures with variations that suggest both continuity and innovation. In essence, the Olmecs provided the template: monumental architecture, complex iconography, ritual ball games, bloodletting ceremonies, astronomical observation, and the concept that kings were living gods. Every pyramid that would rise after them, every glyph carved by Maya scribes, every Aztec sacrifice, all bore the fingerprints of this foundational culture. They were the first, and in being first, they shaped everything that followed. Among all Olmec achievements, none capture the imagination quite like the colossal heads. 17 have been discovered so far, scattered across the ancient heartland, each one a masterwork of engineering and artistry that defies easy explanation. Stand before one, and the first reaction is visceral. These are not abstract representations or stylized deities. They are portraits, unmistakably human, with individual features that suggest specific people. One head has a broad nose and full lips, eyes narrowed in what might be skepticism or wisdom. Another appears younger, with smoother features and an expression of quiet authority. A third seems weathered, as if the sculptor captured not just a face, but a lifetime of experience. They range in height from 5 to 11 feet and weigh between 6 and 50 tons. Each is carved from a single block of basalt, a volcanic stone so dense and hard that working it with stone tools would require thousands of hours of patient labor. Yet the craftsmanship is extraordinary. The details are precise: earlobes with ornate plugs, head coverings with distinct patterns, facial features rendered with anatomical accuracy. Some scholars believe these helmets represent the protective gear worn during the ritual ball game, suggesting the heads commemorate great athletes or warrior kings. Others propose they depict rulers in ceremonial regalia, frozen in stone to extend their authority beyond death. But perhaps the most profound mystery is not what the heads represent, but how they came to be. The basalt from which they were carved originates in the Tuxtla Mountains, a volcanic range 50 miles from San Lorenzo and over 60 miles from La Venta. Imagine the logistics: quarrying a 50-ton boulder from solid rock using only stone tools, then transporting it across jungle, swamp, and river without wheels, without draft animals, without metal. The prevailing theory involves wooden rollers, rope woven from plant fibers, and hundreds of laborers working in coordinated teams. The boulders would have been rolled to the nearest river, loaded onto massive rafts, and floated downstream during the flood season when water levels were highest. Rapids would need to be navigated. Sandbars would threaten to strand the cargo. Once near their destination, the stones would be dragged overland again, up slopes and across soft ground that could swallow the unwary. The entire process might take months, even years, requiring not just labor, but organization, planning, and an unwavering commitment to a vision. And this wasn't done once. It was done 17 times at minimum, possibly more, whose remains lie still buried beneath jungle soil. What compelled this monumental effort? The heads serve no obvious practical function. They are too heavy to move casually, too permanent to be temporary displays. They don't mark tombs, and no skeletal remains have been found directly associated with them. They simply exist, watchful, silent, enduring. Some researchers suggest they functioned as boundary markers, establishing territorial claims or demarcating sacred spaces. Others propose they served as ancestors, physical embodiments of lineage and continuity that reminded the living of their connection to the past. Still others see them as political propaganda, displays of power that announce to all who passed, "We can move mountains. We can command nature. We are not to be challenged." Yet there's something in their expressions that resists purely political interpretation. These faces seem contemplative, even melancholic. They don't scream power. They whisper it, with the quiet confidence of those who need not raise their voices to be heard. The colossal heads are, above all, acts of faith. Faith in the endurance of stone. Faith that future generations would remember. Faith that some essential truth could be preserved in carved basalt when all else crumbled into dust. And perhaps that faith was justified. 3,000 years later, we still stand before these faces, still wonder at their meaning, still feel the weight of their gaze. The year was 1862, and a Mexican farmer named Jose Maria Malgar y Serrano was clearing land for cultivation near Tres Zapotes when his machete struck something that rang with a hollow stone sound. Curious, he began to dig, expecting perhaps a boulder that would need to be moved or broken. What emerged instead changed history. The top of a giant head slowly appeared, smooth, carved, unmistakably human. As more soil was removed, the full scale became apparent. A basalt portrait nearly 6 feet tall, wearing what appeared to be a helmet, with eyes that seemed to look directly at whoever stood before it. Melgar y Serrano, to his credit, recognized that he had found something extraordinary. He documented the discovery and brought it to the attention of scholars. But in the mid-19th century, archaeology in Mexico was still in its infancy. The scientific community struggled to contextualize the find. Some suggested it was Phoenician, others argued for Egyptian influence, and a few dismissed it as a natural formation coincidentally resembling a human face. It would be decades before systematic excavation revealed the truth. This was not an anomaly, but part of a much larger cultural complex, one that predated the Maya by centuries. But here's the haunting part. In the rural communities near ancient Olmec sites, stories persist of watching stones that emerge from the earth during heavy rains. Farmers occasionally report finding fragments: a carved eye, a section of helmet, a smooth curve of basalt that suggests a cheek or chin. Many pieces are never reported to authorities. They're either revered out of superstition, incorporated into modern structures, or kept as family heirlooms, silent connections to ancestors whose names have been lost but whose presence still permeates the land. One elderly woman in a village near San Lorenzo keeps a stone earplug in her home, passed down through generations. She doesn't know which head it came from or when it was found, only that her great-grandfather told her it once belonged to a king who heard the rain before it fell. These fragments are whispers from the earth, reminders that what we've discovered is only a fraction of what remains hidden. Beneath every cornfield, every modern road, every town square in the ancient Olmec heartland, there may be watching eyes, stone faces waiting patiently for the soil to erode, for the next heavy rain, for the next curious farmer to strike basalt with a blade and wonder what lies beneath. The Olmecs understood permanence. They built for eternity, and eternity, it seems, is still unfolding. To glimpse Olmec spirituality is to peer through layers of time into a worldview where the boundaries between human, animal, and divine were fluid, permeable, and constantly shifting. Their art speaks of transformation, of beings that exist in multiple states simultaneously, neither one thing nor another, but something both and neither. Central to this cosmology is the jaguar, a figure with infantile features, a downturned mouth, fangs, and almond-shaped eyes that seem to hold ancient knowledge. This being appears everywhere in Olmec art, carved into jade celts, molded in clay, painted on pottery, etched into stone altars. Sometimes it's depicted being cradled by human figures. Other times it appears alone, floating in a void of symbolic meaning that scholars have spent decades attempting to decipher. Mainstream interpretation suggests the jaguar represents a rain deity, an agricultural god whose blessing ensured fertile fields and abundant harvests. The jaguar connection makes symbolic sense. Jaguars are nocturnal predators associated with caves, water, and the underworld in Mesoamerican thought. Their spotted pelts might have evoked the starry night sky or the dappled light of the forest floor. They were creatures of liminal spaces, neither fully of the earth nor the sky, hunting in the twilight hours when day and night intersect. But the jaguar's infant-like features suggest something deeper. Some scholars propose it represents the divine child, a god born from the union of a human woman and a supernatural jaguar, a foundational myth that establishes the ruling elite's claim to divine ancestry. Others see it as a symbol of transformation itself, the moment of change captured in stone, representing shamanic journeys or initiatory rites where individuals transcended their human limitations and touched the divine. Beyond the jaguar, other deities populate Olmec iconography. Serpents writhe through their art, sometimes feathered, sometimes scaled, always associated with water, fertility, and the cyclical nature of existence. Fire serpents appear in ritual contexts, their bodies marked with flames that suggest volcanic origins or the transformative power of heat. Maize gods emerge from split gourds, symbolizing sustenance, renewal, and the eternal cycle of planting and harvest. The Olmecs also venerated a rain god, a figure that would evolve into Tlaloc of the Aztecs and Chac of the Maya. In Olmec representations, this deity often appears with were-jaguar features, suggesting a conceptual overlap that modern categories struggle to accommodate. To the Olmecs, perhaps there was no distinction between the god who brought rain and a god who embodied the predatory power of the jungle. They were aspects of a unified cosmic force. Twin deities appear in Olmec art, prefiguring the hero twins of Maya mythology. These figures represent duality, light and dark, life and death, sky and underworld. Their stories, lost to us now, likely involve journeys through supernatural realms, contests with divine forces, and the establishment of cosmic order through sacrifice and heroism. What's striking is how many of these divine concepts reappear in later Mesoamerican civilizations. The feathered serpent becomes Quetzalcoatl. The were-jaguar evolves into various jaguar deities across the region. The rain god persists in culture after culture. The divine twins resurface in the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation epic. It's as if the Olmecs established a religious vocabulary that Mesoamerica would speak, with variations for the next 3,000 years. Their gods were not distant, abstract entities, but immanent forces woven into the fabric of reality. They lived in the rumble of thunder, the scream of jaguars in the night, the germination of seeds, and the flow of rivers. To worship these gods was to acknowledge one's place in a cosmos far larger and stranger than human comprehension could fully grasp. And perhaps that's why their religious art still resonates. The were-jaguar's ambiguous expression, the serpent's endless coils, the divine child's knowing gaze. These are not answers but questions, not certainties but invitations to wonder at the vast mystery that surrounds human existence. Beneath the jungle canopy, where sunlight filters through leaves in shimmering fragments, it's easy to forget that ancient peoples were intimately connected to the sky. Yet the Olmecs, like all agricultural societies, lived by celestial rhythms. The movements of sun, moon, and planets determined when to plant, when to harvest, when to hold ceremonies, and when to prepare for the rains. At La Venta, this cosmic awareness is literally written into the landscape. The city's ceremonial complex is aligned with remarkable precision. The Great Pyramid, a massive clay structure shaped like a fluted volcano, sits along an axis that deviates only 2 degrees from true north, an achievement that required careful astronomical observation and mathematical calculation. This alignment was not accidental. It was fundamental to the site's sacred function. Recent studies reveal that other structures at La Venta align with the rising and setting positions of the sun during solstices and equinoxes. These alignment points would have created dramatic visual effects during certain times of the year. Sunrise illuminating specific altars, shadows falling in precise patterns, light and shadow performing an annual dance that reaffirmed the connection between heaven and earth. But the Olmecs likely tracked more than just the sun's movements. Venus, the evening star, held profound significance for later Mesoamerican cultures, and traces of this veneration appear in Olmec iconography. The planet's 584-day cycle, its appearance as morning star, disappearance behind the sun, and reemergence as evening star may have been encoded in the spacing of monuments, the timing of ceremonies, or the layout of sacred precincts. Venus was associated with warfare, royalty, and transformation, making it a natural focus for elite ritual activity. The moon, too, commanded attention. Its phases dictated agricultural activities and likely regulated ceremonial calendars. In a culture where religious and political authority derived from the ability to predict and explain celestial events, moon watching was not idle astronomy, but essential statecraft. Some researchers go further, suggesting that Olmec astronomical knowledge was far more sophisticated than the sparse architectural record might indicate. They may have tracked the cycles of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, identifying patterns that took decades to complete. They may have understood the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes the position of stars to shift over centuries. They may have developed mathematical systems for calculating eclipses, those terrifying moments when the sun or moon was devoured by darkness. If true, this would mean the Olmecs laid the groundwork for the Maya long count calendar, that extraordinary timekeeping system that tracked days with precision across millennia. The long count required not just astronomical observation, but conceptual breakthroughs, the invention of place notation, a concept of zero, and the philosophical framework to conceive of time as a measurable, cyclical, yet infinitely extending dimension. The oldest confirmed long count date comes from the Olmec site of Tres Zapotes. Carved on a monument called Stela C, the date corresponds to 31 BCE, but the calendar system it employs was clearly established long before that moment. This suggests the Olmecs had already been refining their astronomical knowledge for centuries, passing it down through generations of priest astronomers who stood on pyramid platforms, watched the heavens wheel overhead, and translated cosmic movements into earthly prophecy. There's a poetic symmetry to this. The Olmecs carved faces that stare earthward, permanent and unmoving. But they also lifted their eyes skyward, tracking the movements of lights that seemed eternal, yet followed patterns more reliable than any earthly king. In stone and stars, they found two forms of immortality, one solid, one luminous, both essential to their understanding of existence. Beneath the jungle today, vines strangle the platforms where those ancient astronomers once stood, but the stars still follow their paths, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations. The Olmecs knew this. They built their monuments to endure, but they built their calendars to transcend, creating a temporal architecture that would outlast even basalt. In the fringes of archaeological discourse away from peer-reviewed journals and academic symposiums, a controversial idea persists. The Olmec colossal heads, with their broad noses, full lips, and distinctive features, represent evidence of African contact with the Americas long before Columbus. The theory emerged in the early 20th century and has been repeatedly revived despite consistent dismissal by mainstream scholars. Proponents point to specific facial characteristics that they claim resemble sub-Saharan African features more than indigenous American ones. They cite the apparent helmets as evidence of foreign military influence. Some even suggest that ancient Egyptian or West African mariners crossed the Atlantic, bringing with them knowledge of monumental architecture, metalworking, and astronomical observation. The hypothesis is seductive in its narrative simplicity. Lost sailors, blown off course or intentionally exploring, arrive in Mesoamerica and are welcomed or conquered by local populations. Cultural exchange follows, and suddenly, the Olmecs leap from Neolithic villages to sophisticated civilization because they received a transoceanic infusion of Old World knowledge. But the evidence simply doesn't support this scenario. Genetic studies of ancient and modern indigenous populations show no significant African or European admixture during the relevant time period. The Olmec toolkit, ceramics, stone carving techniques, agricultural practices, developed organically from earlier Mesoamerican cultures with no sudden technological leaps that would suggest outside intervention. The architectural styles, while impressive, have clear local antecedents and don't resemble Egyptian or African structures in function or form. As for the facial features of the colossal heads, physical anthropologists note that they fall well within the range of variation seen in indigenous Mesoamerican populations. Broad noses and full lips are not uniquely African traits. They appear in populations worldwide. The helmets are better interpreted as ritual headgear or protective equipment for the ball game, not evidence of foreign military contact. So why does this theory persist? Part of the appeal lies in a troubling assumption that underlies much fringe archaeology. the belief that indigenous peoples couldn't have achieved sophisticated civilization on their own, that they needed outside help from more advanced cultures. This Eurocentric or Afrocentric bias, whether conscious or not, diminishes the real achievements of the Olmecs and perpetuates colonial-era narratives about cultural superiority. Yet there's another reason these theories endure. They tap into our deep fascination with mystery and connection. The idea that ancient peoples crossed vast oceans, made contact across impossible distances, and shared knowledge despite lacking modern technology is genuinely exciting. It speaks to a human impulse toward exploration, communication, and the transcendence of isolation. The truth, though less dramatic than ancient astronauts or transoceanic voyagers, is more profound. The Olmecs didn't need visitors from Africa or anywhere else. They possessed their own genius, their own vision, their own capacity for innovation. They observed the world around them, experimented with stone and clay, organized their society through social and religious structures, and created monumental art that still moves us 3 millennia later. If anything, the alternative theories do us a disservice by distracting from the real mystery. How did a culture emerge in the humid jungles of the Gulf Coast, with no bronze, no iron, no wheels or draft animals, and build a civilization so foundational that its influence shaped an entire cultural region for thousands of years? That question, grounded in actual evidence and devoid of speculative voyages, is far more worthy of our wonder. Among the many mysteries surrounding the Olmecs, perhaps none is more frustrating than the silence of their language. They left behind monumental architecture, exquisite jade carvings, intricate pottery, and those haunting basalt faces, but no texts, no inscriptions, no key to unlock the sounds that once filled their cities. Or did they? The question of Olmec writing is one of archaeology's most contentious debates. Unlike the Maya, whose glyphic texts cover stele, codices, and temple walls and narratives we're still learning to fully decipher, the Olmecs left behind only hints, symbols carved into stone, incised into pottery, or painted onto surfaces long since decayed. The Cascale block, discovered in 1999, represents the most compelling evidence for Olmec script. This serpentine stone slab bears 62 symbols arranged in horizontal rows, some of which repeat in patterns suggesting linguistic structure. If it is writing, and not all scholars agree, it would be the oldest script in the Americas, predating Maya glyphs by centuries. The symbols include abstract geometric shapes, stylized plants or insects, and what might be calendar notation. But without a bilingual text or a large corpus of examples, decipherment remains impossible. The block speaks, but we've lost the grammar to understand it. Other Olmec artifacts bear what appear to be glyphic elements. A jade mask includes symbols that might represent a name or title. Pottery fragments show signs that could be ownership marks, religious invocations, or simply decorative motifs. Stone monuments include cartouches and panels that suggest text, though their meaning remains opaque. This has led some researchers to propose that the Olmecs possessed a proto-writing system, a collection of standardized symbols that conveyed specific concepts without forming a fully phonetic script. Similar systems existed in ancient Near East: cylinder seals with pictograms, accounting tokens, mnemonic devices that aided memory but didn't capture spoken language in its full complexity. If the Olmecs had such a system, what concepts did it encode? Astronomical observations, certainly. Dates, cycles, the movements of celestial bodies. Religious formulae, likely. Invocations to gods or descriptions of ritual procedures. Elite names and titles, establishing legitimacy and lineage. Trade records, perhaps tracking the movement of jade, obsidian, and cacao across their extensive networks. But there's another possibility, more speculative yet hauntingly poignant. Perhaps the Olmecs didn't need extensive writing because their culture privileged oral tradition. In societies without writing, memory becomes sacred, And individuals are trained from childhood to preserve vast amounts of information, genealogies, myths, ritual instructions, astronomical knowledge within the architecture of their minds. Imagine Olmec priests standing before the colossal heads, reciting the deeds of the kings they represented, their voices carrying across plazas where thousands gathered. Imagine shamans entering trance states, channeling gods whose names and attributes had been passed down through generations of careful teaching. Imagine master artisans explaining the symbolic meaning of jade carvings to apprentices, knowledge encoded not in text, but in gesture, intonation, and context. This oral knowledge would have been as sophisticated as any written tradition, but infinitely more fragile. When the last speaker died, when the lineages broke, when Spanish priests burned what they called pagan idols and forbade indigenous languages, millennia of accumulated wisdom evaporated like morning mist. Later Mesoamerican cultures, the Maya, Zapotecs, and others, did develop full writing systems, suggesting they learned from Olmec foundations even as they expanded upon them. The glyphs we can now partially read contain echoes of older concepts, hints of an intellectual lineage that stretches back to those first experiments with symbol and meaning in the Olmec heartland. So when we stand before Olmec art and wonder at its significance, we're experiencing a particular kind of silence, not the absence of meaning, but the absence of the key to unlock it. The carvings speak, the symbols gesture toward understanding, but the tongue that once gave them voice has faded beyond recovery. Yet something remains. In the swirl of a carved glyph, in the arrangement of symbols on stone, in the very act of carving meaning into permanent materials, the Olmecs left proof that they had something to say, stories worth telling, knowledge worth preserving, truths worth immortalizing. We may never hear their language, but we can still sense its presence, like hearing music through thick walls, feeling rhythm without discerning melody, knowing that on the other side of silence, something profound once resonated. The name Olmec is not what they called themselves. It's a Nahuatl word meaning rubber people, given to them centuries after their civilization had fallen by the Aztecs, who found abandoned cities in regions known for producing latex from rubber trees. But the name, accidental as it is, captures something essential about this culture. The Olmecs were indeed masters of rubber, the first known civilization to systematically harvest and process latex from Castilia elastica trees. They made this discovery at a time when most of the world had never encountered elastic materials. By mixing latex with juice from morning glory vines, which contained chemicals that vulcanized the rubber, increasing its elasticity and durability, they created balls that could bounce with astonishing vigor. These weren't toys. They were sacred objects central to the Mesoamerican ball game, a ritualized sport that combined athletic prowess with cosmic symbolism. Picture the ball court, a narrow alley flanked by sloped walls, open to the sky, silent except for the breathing of players and the shuffle of spectators. Two teams face each other, bodies painted, wearing protective padding around their hips and knees. A heavy rubber ball, solid and weighing several pounds, is put into play. The rules forbade using hands. Players struck the ball with their hips, thighs, and torsos, sending it hurtling back and forth across the court with brutal force. The game required extraordinary endurance, agility, and courage. Injury was common. Death, the oldest of the great Olmec centers, San Lorenzo, rises from the landscape, not as a natural formation, but as an act of human will imposed upon the earth. Around 1200 BCE, at a time when the Mediterranean was still recovering from the Bronze Age collapse and the Trojan War passed from history into legend, laborers in Mesoamerica were reshaping an entire plateau. They didn't build upward on existing terrain. They excavated, filled, terraced, and sculpted the land itself. The result was a massive artificial platform covering approximately 1.5 square miles, elevated above the surrounding floodplains like an island of stone and earth. Upon this engineered foundation, they constructed plazas, courtyards, elite residences, and ceremonial spaces that would serve as the political and spiritual heart of the Olmec world for nearly 500 years. The scale of this undertaking is staggering. Millions of cubic feet of earth had to be moved using only baskets, human labor, and coordinated organization. The plateau was shaped with precise drainage systems, stone-lined channels that prevented erosion and controlled water flow during the torrential rainy season. These weren't simple ditches. They were sophisticated hydraulic engineering, with some channels running underground, intersecting at calculated angles, and featuring removable stone covers for maintenance. The city's layout suggests careful planning according to cosmological principles. The colossal heads, 10 have been found at San Lorenzo, were positioned at strategic points around the site, perhaps marking territorial boundaries or delineating sacred from secular spaces. Each head faced outward, as if guarding the approaches to the ceremonial center, their basalt eyes eternally watchful. Beyond the heads, San Lorenzo's artisans created an extraordinary corpus of sculpture. Stone thrones, often called altars, depict rulers emerging from cave-like niches, symbolizing their connection to the underworld and their role as mediators between human and divine realms. Stone figures, both naturalistic and fantastical, populated the plaza's kneeling captives, shamanic practitioners in trance postures, anthropomorphic jaguars frozen in mid-transformation. The city was also a hub of long-distance trade. Obsidian from the highlands of Guatemala and central Mexico has been found in abundance, shaped into prismatic blades so sharp they could cut through flesh with barely any pressure. Jade from the Motagua Valley in Guatemala, that luminous green stone prized above all other materials, was carved into celts, maskets, and figurines. Marine shells from both Pacific and Gulf coasts became trumpets, ornaments, and ritual objects. Iron ore was ground and polished into mirrors, the reflective surfaces used perhaps for divination, astronomical observation, or communication with the spirit world. All this speaks to a society with surplus wealth, specialized labor, and far-reaching connections. San Lorenzo wasn't isolated. It was cosmopolitan, drawing materials and likely ideas from across Mesoamerica and synthesizing them into something distinctly Olmec. But around 900 BCE, something changed. The archaeological record shows evidence of systematic destruction. Many monuments were defaced, broken, or ritually buried. The colossal heads were toppled and carefully interred in specially prepared pits, sometimes accompanied by offerings. Stone thrones were shattered. The city didn't burn. There is no evidence of violent conquest by external enemies, but it was deliberately decommissioned, its sacred objects neutralized, its power structures dismantled. Why? Theories abound. Perhaps environmental change made the site less viable, river courses shifting, agricultural lands becoming exhausted, or catastrophic flooding that couldn't be overcome even with sophisticated drainage. Perhaps internal political upheaval led to revolution, with new factions rejecting the old order and its symbols. Perhaps San Lorenzo's power simply migrated to Venta, and the city was ritually closed to mark this transition, its monuments buried not out of hatred, but out of respect, allowing them to rest after their service. What's clear is that the destruction was controlled, purposeful, even reverential. The colossal heads weren't smashed beyond recognition. They were gently laid down, covered with earth, returned to the ground from which they came. It's as if the Olmecs understood that power has seasons, that even stone kings must eventually sleep. After San Lorenzo's decline, the city wasn't immediately abandoned. People continued to live there, but it never regained its former grandeur. The focus of Olmec civilization shifted southward to Venta, where a new architectural vision would emerge, different in character, but built upon the foundations San Lorenzo had established. Today, the ruins lie partially excavated, partially reclaimed by jungle. The stone heads that once watched over bustling plazas now rest in museums or in situ under protective shelters. The massive earthen plateau, still visible, hints at the ambition of people who saw landscape as raw material for cultural expression. San Lorenzo stands as a testament to humanity's compulsion to mark our presence on the world, to create order from chaos, to build something that proclaims, "We were here, we mattered, we shaped the very earth beneath our feet." And for 5 centuries, that proclamation echoed across Mesoamerica, until the day came to return the giants to the earth and let another city take up the torch. In the humid chambers where Olmec elites gathered, one material signified power above all others. Not gold, which they scarcely used. Not silver, which held little value in their cosmology. The supreme material, the substance that connected rulers to the divine, was jade, a translucent green stone that seemed to hold captured sunlight filtered through forest leaves. The Olmecs' obsession with jade went far beyond mere aesthetic appreciation. In Mesoamerican thought, jade represented life itself. Its green color evoked growing maize, the regeneration of vegetation after rain, the eternal renewal of the natural world. Its hardness symbolized permanence and indestructibility. Its coolness against the skin suggested water, that most precious resource in an agricultural society. To possess jade was to hold a fragment of cosmic power, a physical manifestation of the life force that animated all existence. But jade wasn't local. The Olmec heartland has no jade sources. Every piece had to be imported from the Motagua Valley in what is now Guatemala, over 500 miles away through mountains, jungles, and rival territories. This distance made jade inherently valuable, but more importantly, it established San Lorenzo and La Venta as nodes in a vast trade network that extended across Mesoamerica. Consider what this required: diplomatic relationships with distant peoples' trade routes that had to be maintained, and protected specialists who could identify high-quality jade and distinguish it from serpentine and other green stones that might fool the untrained. And master carvers capable of working a material harder than steel, using only other stones as tools. Jade carving was a monumental undertaking. The stone had to be slowly abraded using sand, water, and stone or wooden tools, a process that might take months or even years for a single piece. Hollow jade celts, axe-shaped objects with no practical cutting function, were created by drilling from both ends with reed drills and abrasive paste, a technique requiring extraordinary patience and precision. The slightest error could shatter months of work. The finished products were astonishing. Jade maskettes with jaguar features, so finely carved that individual teeth and eyelids are visible. Jade earflers, perforated cylinders worn through stretched earlobes by the elite, marking status and connection to divine forces. Jade pendants depicting supernatural beings, shamanic practitioners, or abstract symbols whose meaning we can only guess. Jade celts engraved with iconography, showing rulers receiving divine mandate or performing sacred rituals. These objects weren't merely worn. They were animated through ritual. Olmec art often shows jade objects fed with offerings, suggesting belief that the stone itself was alive, capable of agency, requiring sustenance and respect. Some jade artifacts show evidence of repeated drilling, not for decoration, but possibly to bleed the stone, to activate its spiritual power through symbolic wounding. The most elaborate jade offerings come from La Venta, where massive caches were buried beneath plazas. In one cache, 16 jade and serpentine figurines were arranged in a scene. 15 figures formed a gathering, with one standing apart, facing them. Were they witnessing a ritual? Judging a captive? Receiving a prophetic vision? The arrangement was deliberate, meaningful, and then buried forever, sealed beneath tons of earth where no human eye would see it again. This practice of elaborate burial offerings speaks to a worldview where the underworld was not separate from the living world, but deeply connected to it. Objects placed beneath the earth maintained power, influenced events, connected the living to ancestors and gods dwelling in subterranean realms. Jade, imperishable and eternally green, was the perfect medium for such communication. The Olmec jade trade also reveals something about their political structure. Control over jade sources, or trade routes, meant control over the material that legitimized power. Rulers who could distribute jade to subordinates, allies, and ritual specialists were demonstrating their access to cosmic forces. The green stone flowed like power made visible, marking hierarchies, sealing alliances, and creating networks of obligation that extended across vast distances. This pattern would continue long after the Olmecs. Maya kings wore jade masks in death, believing the stone would preserve them for resurrection. Aztec emperors kept vast jade treasuries, and Moctezuma reportedly valued a fine jade more highly than a cartload of gold. The conquistadors focused on gold and silver, often discarded jade, to the horror of indigenous peoples who saw priceless spiritual treasures treated as worthless stone. But for the Olmecs, who initiated this jade obsession, the green stone was more than wealth or status. It was life, continuity, and connection. To work jade was to touch eternity. To wear it was to carry a piece of the divine against your skin. To bury it was to plant an offering that would bloom in the underworld, nurturing the cosmic order that sustained all existence. In museums today, under careful lighting, Olmec jade still glows with that strange inner luminescence. 3,000 years haven't dimmed it. The stone endures, cool and green and eternal, just as the Olmecs believed it would, a fragment of their worldview preserved in the one material they trusted to outlast even their civilization. Among all the enigmatic images in Olmec art, none has generated more scholarly debate than the were-jaguar. This hybrid being, part human infant, part jaguar, part something else entirely, appears in hundreds of artifacts across the Olmec world, rendered in jade, basalt, clay, and wood. Its meaning has puzzled researchers for decades, generating theories that range from the mundane to the fantastical. The classic were-jaguar has distinctive features: a downturned mouth resembling a jaguar's snarl, often with pronounced fangs or gums; almond-shaped eyes, sometimes slit-pupilled like a cat's; a cleft head, as if the skull has been symbolically split open; chubby, infantile limbs and torso. The overall impression is unsettling. Neither human nor animal, neither child nor adult, existing in some liminal category that defies classification. Mainstream interpretation suggests the were-jaguar represents the offspring of a supernatural union between a human woman and a jaguar deity. This foundational myth, lost to us now, would have explained the divine origins of Olmec royalty. If rulers could claim descent from this primordial coupling, they positioned themselves as inherently different from common people, not fully human, but partaking of divine nature. This concept of divine ancestry appears across cultures. Egyptian pharaohs claimed descent from gods. Chinese emperors were sons of heaven. European monarchs ruled by divine right. The specific animal varies. Sometimes it's a bird, a serpent, or a bull, but the underlying logic remains consistent. Those who rule do so because supernatural forces flow through their bloodlines. But there are alternative interpretations. Some scholars see the word jaguar not as a literal hybrid, but as a representation of shamanic transformation. In many indigenous American cultures, shamans are believed to transform into jaguars during trance states, gaining the animal's power, ferocity, and ability to navigate between worlds. The were-jaguar imagery might depict this moment of transformation, a human caught mid-shift, simultaneously in both forms, belonging fully to neither. Others propose the imagery represents a specific ritual practice, the jaguar mask. If elite individuals wore jaguar pelts and masks during ceremonies, partially concealing their human identity while channeling jaguar power, the were-jaguar might be a stylized representation of this ritual persona. The cleft head could symbolize the opening of consciousness, the splitting of ordinary awareness to allow divine forces entry. Still, other theories focus on the infantile characteristics. In Mesoamerican thought, children occupy a liminal status, recently arrived from the spirit world, not yet fully socialized into human culture, closer to the divine than adults. The word jaguar's baby-like features might signify this transitional state, representing not a literal infant, but a conceptual stage between divine and human existence. The jaguar itself carried profound symbolic weight. As the apex predator of Mesoamerica, it embodied power, stealth, and mastery. Jaguars hunt at night, see in darkness, move through the jungle like shadows. They're associated with caves, water, and the underworld, all liminal spaces where the boundaries between realms grow thin. Their spotted pelts evoke the starry night sky, creating visual connections between Earth and cosmos. In many later Mesoamerican cultures, jaguars were specifically associated with rulers and warriors. The jaguar throne was a common symbol of kingship. Jaguar warriors formed elite military orders. To be jaguar-like was to possess qualities essential for leadership: strength, courage, tactical intelligence, and the ability to strike decisively when necessary. The word jaguar, then, might represent the ideal ruler, one who has transcended ordinary humanity through divine bloodline, ritual practice, or shamanic transformation, who moves between the human and supernatural worlds with the ease of a jaguar moving through forest and cave, who embodies power that is simultaneously physical and spiritual. What makes the word jaguar particularly intriguing is its persistence. Long after Olmec civilization faded, word jaguar imagery continued to appear in modified forms across Mesoamerica. The Maya developed complex jaguar deities, including the jaguar god of the underworld. The Aztecs venerated Tipialatl, the heart of the mountain, a jaguar deity associated with caves, echoes, and earth. The conceptual thread runs unbroken from Olmec origins through 3,000 years of cultural evolution. This suggests the word jaguar wasn't merely decorative or culturally specific. It tapped into something deeper, a fundamental way of thinking about power, transformation, and the relationship between human and natural worlds. It encoded ideas about leadership, spirituality, and identity that resonated across centuries and cultures. In the dim chambers where Olmec elites conducted their mysteries, where jade were jaguar, pendants glowed green in firelight and basalt, where jaguar faces stared from shadowed corners, participants might have experienced something profound: the dissolution of boundaries, the sensation of becoming other, the terror and exhilaration of touching forces larger than individual consciousness. The word jaguar's ambiguous expression: is it snarling or smiling, threatening or protective, perfectly captures this ambiguity of power itself. To wield authority is to become something other than ordinary, to inhabit a space between human community and cosmic forces, to be both protector and predator. And perhaps that's why, 3,000 years later, the word jaguar's image still generates such fascination. It speaks to something we intuitively understand, that leadership, spirituality, and transformation all require becoming something more and something less than purely human, entering territory where the familiar rules no longer apply and new forms emerge. As San Lorenzo declined, a new center emerged, Venta, built on an island in a coastal swamp, surrounded by water and accessed only by boat or raised causeways. It was an unlikely location for a major city, yet for 5 centuries it served as the spiritual heart of the Olmec world, home to perhaps the most iconic monument in all Olmec archaeology, the Great Pyramid. Unlike the step pyramids that would later define Mesoamerican architecture, Venta's pyramid was unique. Built entirely from adobe clay, millions of pounds of it, the structure rises, approximately 110 feet, in a conical form with deep vertical grooves running down its sides. From above, It resembles a fluted volcano, 10 ridges alternating with 10 valleys, creating a pattern that recalls natural geological formations. This resemblance was almost certainly intentional. Volcanoes held profound significance in Mesoamerican cosmology. They were sources of destruction and renewal, mountains that breathed smoke and fire, portals where the Earth's interior forces erupted into the surface world. The Tuxtla Mountains, source of the basalt used for colossal heads, were volcanic. To build a pyramid in volcanic form was to create an artificial sacred mountain, a human-made axis mundi connecting underworld, earth, and sky. But the pyramid's greatest mysteries lie beneath its surface. Magnetic surveys conducted in the 1960s revealed anomalies deep within the structure, areas where magnetic readings deviated dramatically from surrounding soil. The anomalies were too regular to be natural, too deep to easily excavate without potentially destabilizing the entire monument. Speculation immediately followed. Were there hidden chambers? Burial tombs of unknown rulers? Caches of artifacts sealed away in the pyramid's heart? One theory proposes that massive serpentine blocks or magnetite deposits were deliberately placed within the pyramid during construction, creating these anomalies. Serpentine and magnetite were both valued by the Olmecs. Serpentine as a jade-like substitute, magnetite for its strange natural magnetism. Some Olmec mirrors and bars were made from magnetite, suggesting they understood its properties and perhaps used it ritually. But why bury such materials inside a pyramid where no one would see them? Perhaps visibility wasn't the point. If the pyramid functioned as a sacred mountain, as a portal between realms, then its interior became the underworld itself. Objects placed within would exist in that liminal space, accessible to spirits and gods, even if hidden from human eyes. The magnetic properties might have been believed to attract or channel supernatural forces, making the pyramid not just a monument, but an active mechanism for cosmic communication. The pyramid's alignment adds another layer of mystery. Like much of Venta's ceremonial complex, it's oriented 8 degrees west of true north, not a mistake, but a deliberate choice repeated across multiple structures. This alignment doesn't correspond to solstices or equinoxes, but might relate to Venus or other planetary movements, encoding astronomical knowledge into the city's very architecture. Surrounding the pyramid, Venta's layout reveals sophisticated urban planning. The ceremonial complex stretches nearly a mile along a north-south axis, with the Great Pyramid at its southern end. North of the pyramid lie smaller mounds, plazas, and the locations where numerous colossal heads once stood. Buried offerings fill the subsurface. Those extraordinary jade caches, mosaic pavements made from hundreds of serpentine blocks, arranged in abstract jaguar face patterns, then covered with earth, never meant to be seen again. This practice of burying elaborate offerings speaks to a particular theological understanding. The offerings weren't placed where people could admire them, but where they could perform their function, mediating between worlds, feeding the earth, maintaining cosmic balance. Their power derived not from visibility, but from correct placement according to sacred geography. The city also featured stone-lined drains and aqueducts, sophisticated for their time, managing the constant threat of flooding. Living on a swamp island, the inhabitants of Venta had to work with water rather than against it, creating a city that floated in a sense, adapting to seasonal fluctuations while maintaining its ceremonial core. Around 400 BCE, Venta followed San Lorenzo's path into decline. Once again, monuments were ritually buried, colossal heads toppled and interred, massive offerings sealed beneath earth. The pyramid, too massive to easily destroy, was left standing but no longer maintained. Clay structures, without constant upkeep in that humid environment, began to erode. Yet even in abandonment, the site maintained power. Later, peoples continued to visit Venta, leaving offerings at its ancient plazas, suggesting it retained spiritual significance long after its political power had faded. The fluted pyramid, visible for miles across flat coastal plains, remained a landmark, a testament to ambitions that had reshaped earth and swamp into sacred geometry. Today, surrounded by oil facilities and modern infrastructure, Venta's ruins stand partially excavated. The Great Pyramid, weathered and worn, still rises against the sky. Beneath its clay layers, the magnetic anomalies remain, keeping their secrets. Whatever lies in the pyramids, the Olmecs vanished, but their fingerprints remain everywhere in Mesoamerican civilization. Walk through the ruins of Tikal, Palenque, or Copan, great Maya cities that flourished a millennium after Venta fell silent, and the echoes are unmistakable. The architectural forms, the divine kingship, the ritual ball games, the obsession with jade and bloodletting, the celestial observations encoded in stone, all bear the unmistakable signature of Olmec innovation. Consider the pyramid. The Maya perfected it, creating soaring structures with steep staircases climbing toward the heavens, temples perched atop platforms where priests communed with gods visible to all below. But the concept originated with the Olmecs, who first understood that artificial mountains could serve as axis mundi, connecting the three realms of underworld, earth, and sky. The Maya elaborated, refined, and multiplied this idea, but they didn't invent it. The same pattern appears in iconography. The feathered serpent, which the Maya called Quecoc, and then the Aztecs would later worship as Quetzalcoatl, has clear Olmec antecedents. Serpents appear throughout Olmec art, often with elaborate headdresses or plumes, associated with water, fertility, and divine power. The Maya inherited this symbolism, expanded its mythological context, and wove it into complex narratives recorded in glyphic texts that the Olmecs never developed or never preserved. The word jaguar, too, transforms but persists. Maya art depicts numerous jaguar deities: the jaguar god of the underworld, the jaguar paddler gods who navigate celestial rivers, jaguar thrones occupied by kings. The specific Olmec imagery of infant jaguar hybrids fades, but the conceptual core, that jaguars embody supernatural power, that transformation between human and jaguar forms is possible, that rulers must channel this feline force, continues unbroken. The ritual ball game provides perhaps the clearest line of continuity. The Maya constructed elaborate ball courts throughout their territory, some with acoustic properties that amplified the sound of the rubber ball striking stone, creating thunder-like reverberations that could be heard across entire cities. The game retained its cosmic significance, a reenactment of creation myths, a battle between life and death, a ritual that maintained universal order through athletic prowess and blood sacrifice. Maya kings commissioned carved panels showing themselves as ball players, dressed in elaborate protective gear, wielding the rubber ball as a symbol of cosmic authority. The game's rules, its spiritual meaning, its connection to sacrifice and renewal, all descend directly from Olmec tradition, refined over centuries, but fundamentally unchanged in purpose. Divine kingship, too, follows the Olmec template. Maya rulers presented themselves as intermediaries between human and supernatural realms, capable of invoking gods, channeling cosmic forces, and maintaining the delicate balance that kept the universe functioning. They performed bloodletting rituals, piercing their tongues, genitals, and earlobes to offer blood to gods, a practice depicted in Olmec art centuries earlier, where jade bloodletters and stingray spines appear in ritual contexts. The Maya developed this further, creating elaborate mythologies that explained royal power as literally divine. Kings were embodiments of maize gods, reborn cyclically like crops. They could transform into gods during rituals, wearing costumes and masks that didn't merely represent deities, but allowed the gods to manifest physically through the king's body. This concept of ruler as god vessel is pure Olmec innovation, passed down and amplified. Even Maya writing, that extraordinary achievement that allows us to hear ancient voices speaking across centuries, may have Olmec roots. The Cascale block and other fragmentary evidence suggest the Olmecs developed some form of symbolic notation. The Maya took this further, creating a full phonetic writing system with hundreds of glyphs representing sounds, words, and concepts. But the impulse to encode meaning in permanent form, to create visual symbols that transcend spoken language, that impulse was Olmec, the Maya long count calendar, that staggeringly sophisticated system that tracks days across millennia with mathematical precision, appears to have Olmec origins. The oldest confirmed long count date comes from tres sapotes, carved during the late Olmec period. The calendar requires advanced astronomical observation, mathematical concepts including zero and place notation, and a philosophical framework that conceives of time as both cyclical and linear. The Maya perfected this system, using it to calculate eclipses, track planetary cycles, and situate themselves within cosmic history. But the Olmecs built the foundation. Trade networks, too, followed Olmec-established routes. The Maya imported jade from the same Guatemalan sources the Olmecs had exploited centuries earlier. Obsidian from central Mexican quarries flowed through similar channels. Even the geographic extent of Maya civilization roughly corresponds to the outer boundaries of Olmec influence, suggesting that cultural and commercial connections established in the second millennium BCE continued to structure Mesoamerican interactions long after their originators had vanished. But the Maya weren't simply copying the Olmecs. They were inheriting a cultural vocabulary and speaking it in new accents, creating variations on ancient themes that responded to different environmental conditions, different political structures, different historical circumstances. The relationship resembles how medieval European civilization drew from Roman foundations while developing distinctive Gothic cathedrals, chivalric culture, and scholastic philosophy that would have bewildered Caesar or Cicero. Other Mesoamerican cultures showed similar patterns. The Zapotecs at Monte Alban developed writing, astronomy, and monumental architecture that bore Olmec influences while maintaining regional distinctiveness. The great city of Teotihuacan, which dominated central Mexico centuries after the Olmecs fell, featured pyramid construction, plaza layouts, and cosmological orientations that echoed Olmec precedents. Even the Aztecs, who rose to power nearly 2 millennia after Venta's decline, preserved Olmec echoes. They considered the Olmec homeland ancient and mysterious, a place where giants once lived. They collected Olmec jade pieces as heirlooms, treasuring them as artifacts from a primordial age when the world was young and gods walked among humans. This pattern of influence suggests something profound about cultural transmission. Ideas, once released into the world, take on lives of their own. They mutate, adapt, recombine with other influences, and persist through civilizational collapses that destroy political structures but cannot destroy knowledge embedded in practice, symbol, and collective memory. The Olmecs created a cultural blueprint that proved so powerful, so fundamentally aligned with the realities of Mesoamerican life, that every subsequent civilization found ways to incorporate it. They were, in the deepest sense, the mother culture, not because they conquered or colonized, but because they solved fundamental problems of how to organize society, relate to the divine, mark time, and create meaning through monumental art. Their stone faces no longer watched over living cities, but their ideas lived on, adapted by new peoples speaking new languages, worshiping gods with new names, building pyramids that climbed even higher toward the sky. The echo of Olmec genius resonated through every plaza, every carved glyph, every rubber ball striking stone, every king claiming divine authority, every jade offering buried beneath sacred ground. In this sense, the Olmecs never truly disappeared. They dissolved into the cultural substrate of Mesoamerica, becoming so fundamental that they were no longer visible as a separate influence, but simply part of what it meant to be civilized in that time and place. Their greatest achievement wasn't his survival but transformation, becoming not a memory, but a living tradition that shaped centuries of human creativity and spiritual exploration. The echoes continue even now. When archaeologists excavate Maya sites, they often find Olmec-style artifacts, jade celts, ceramic vessels, stone carvings, treated as precious heirlooms centuries old when buried. The Maya knew they stood on ancient foundations, that the knowledge they possessed had been accumulated across vast stretches of time by peoples, whose names they no longer remembered, but whose presence they still honored. And perhaps that's the truest form of immortality, not to be remembered in detail, but to become inseparable from everything that follows, to shape the fundamental assumptions through which future generations understand their world. The Olmecs achieved this. 3,000 years after their cities fell silent, their ideas still echo through the temples of their successors, still resonate in every scholar who studies Mesoamerican civilization, still whisper from the stone faces that watched empires rise and fall, but never ceased their patient vigil. At the margins of academic discourse, where speculation meets pattern recognition and evidence grows thin, another theory emerges, that the Olmecs weren't the beginning but a remembrance, that their sudden appearance, fully formed with sophisticated art and monumental architecture, suggests not gradual development, but the inheritance of knowledge from something older, something lost. Proponents of this view point to what they see as anomalies: the lack of clear precursor cultures, showing step-by-step development from simple villages to complex civilization; the apparent sophistication of Olmec astronomy and mathematics from their earliest periods; the ambition of their first monuments, built not tentatively, but with confidence that suggests prior experience; the mysterious motifs in their art that some claim resemble iconography from distant cultures separated by oceans. One thread of speculation connects the Olmecs to hypothetical lost civilizations, variously placed in Antarctica before ice coverage in the sunken, continental shelves exposed during lower sea levels, or in the Amazon basin, where satellite imagery occasionally reveals geometric earthworks hidden beneath rainforest canopy. These theorists propose that some earlier, sophisticated society developed advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and monumental construction, then was destroyed by catastrophe: the Younger Dryas climate disruption, massive flooding at the end of the Ice Age, or asteroid impacts, leaving only scattered survivors who preserved fragments of lost wisdom. In this scenario, the Olmecs represent not independent innovation, but cultural recovery. Their colossal heads might commemorate not contemporary rulers, but ancestral kings from the before time. Their astronomical alignments might preserve ancient observational knowledge rather than representing new discoveries. Their jade trade networks might follow routes established in deeper antiquity. Some point to apparent similarities between Olmec and Andean cultures: the monumental stone construction, the sophisticated textile production, the emphasis on jade-like stones, certain iconographic elements that superficially resemble each other. Could there have been contact between these distant regions? Or did both inherit from an even older common source? Others note curious parallels with Polynesian cultures: the emphasis on massive stone monuments, the sophisticated navigation techniques required to maintain long-distance trade networks, certain artistic motifs that seem to echo across the Pacific. A few bold theorists propose trans-Pacific contact, suggesting that voyagers might have crossed the ocean thousands of years ago, bringing cultural influences that seeded both Olmec and Polynesian developments. Still others draw connections to ancient motifs found globally. The serpent as divine symbol appears in civilizations from Egypt to India to China to Mesoamerica. The pyramid form emerges independently in multiple locations. Divine kingship appears across unconnected cultures. Are these independent solutions to universal human questions? Or do they represent the scattered remnants of a global civilization, predating all known history? The evidence for such claims ranges from intriguing to wildly speculative. Yes, there are similarities in pyramid construction worldwide, but pyramids are structurally stable shapes that emerge naturally when building tall structures from stacked materials. Yes, serpent symbolism appears globally, but snakes are ubiquitous, dangerous, and associated with transformative qualities, shedding skin, that make them natural candidates for religious symbolism across cultures. The geological and archaeological evidence for lost advanced civilizations remains elusive. Ice core data, sea level reconstructions, and systematic archaeological surveys haven't revealed the ruins of sophisticated pre-Olmec societies. The gradual development of Mesoamerican culture from Paleo-Indian hunter-gatherers through archaic period villages to formative period chiefdoms shows relatively clear continuity, even if some transitional stages remain poorly documented. Genetic evidence also contradicts these theories. DNA studies of indigenous American populations show they derive from migrations across the Bering Land Bridge during the Ice Age, with no significant genetic contributions from Old World populations until European contact. If there had been major transatlantic or trans-Pacific migrations during the Olmec period, genetic signatures would persist. Yet the theories persist because they address something that does feel mysterious: the apparent sophistication of early Olmec culture. The first colossal heads aren't crude experiments, but masterworks. The earliest ceremonial centers show urban planning and architectural knowledge that seems remarkably advanced for their time period. The mainstream explanation is less dramatic, but well supported. Development happened faster than the archaeological record currently reveals. Wooden and adobe structures decay rapidly in tropical environments, leaving little trace. Early ceremonial centers might have been built, used, and abandoned multiple times before the monumental stone phase began. The knowledge required to create colossal heads developed gradually through smaller-scale stone carving that left fewer traces. Moreover, the appearance of sudden sophistication often reflects our limited knowledge rather than historical reality. As more sites are excavated, more transitional phases emerge. The pre-Olmec Mochaya culture, for instance, shows ceramic traditions that developed into Olmec styles. Earlier settlements demonstrate growing social complexity and long-distance trade networks. The pieces are there. We're simply still assembling the puzzle. But speculation serves a purpose beyond just filling gaps in knowledge. It keeps us questioning, prevents comfortable assumptions, and occasionally points toward legitimate research questions that deserve investigation. The idea of trans-Pacific contact, while unsupported by current evidence, led to serious studies of ancient navigation capabilities, ocean current patterns, and the theoretical possibility of pre-Columbian voyaging. Some of this research has revealed surprising findings about ancient maritime technology, even if it hasn't confirmed trans-Pacific contact. The lost civilization theories, for all their speculative excess, remind us that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Our understanding of prehistory remains incomplete, constantly revised by new discoveries. The confident narratives we construct are provisional, subject to radical revision when someone unearths an unexpected artifact or reinterprets existing data through new frameworks. The Olmecs don't need lost civilizations to be fascinating. Their actual achievement, developing sophisticated culture in challenging tropical environments using Stone Age technology, creating monumental art that still resonates emotionally across millennia, establishing cultural patterns that shaped an entire region for thousands of years, is remarkable enough without invoking Atlantis or ancient astronauts. But the persistence of alternative theories speaks to something essential about how we relate to the past. We want connection, continuity, mystery. We want to believe that our ancestors possessed wisdom we've forgotten, that ancient peoples saw further and deeper than we give them credit for. Sometimes this impulse leads to pseudoscience, but sometimes it leads to genuine appreciation for the sophistication of pre-industrial cultures that conventional history once dismissed as primitive. The truth about the Olmecs lies somewhere between romantic speculation and dry academic analysis. They were neither the remnants of Atlantis nor simple villagers who stumbled into civilization. They were humans like us, curious, ambitious, spiritual, creative, who observed their world carefully, experimented boldly, and built something that endured long after their names were forgotten. And if that's less dramatic than ancient astronauts or lost super civilizations, it's also more profound, a testament to ordinary human capability when given time, motivation, and the freedom to create. In the mythology of cultures worldwide, one narrative appears with striking consistency: the flood, a great deluge that drowns the world, destroying civilizations, reshaping landscapes, and leaving only scattered survivors to rebuild from ruins. The story appears in Mesopotamian epics, Hebrew scripture, Hindu Vedas, Greek myths, and in the oral traditions of cultures from Australia to the Americas. Mesoamerican civilizations told flood stories too. The Aztecs believed the world had been destroyed and recreated multiple times, with one age ending in catastrophic flooding. Maya codices reference world-destroying waters. And while Olmec mythology remains largely unknown due to lack of written records, their art suggests a profound preoccupation with water, serpents associated with rain and rivers, deities with aquatic characteristics, ceremonial centers built on islands and near waterways. Could these myths preserve actual memories? Not of divine punishment or supernatural catastrophe, but of real climatic events that disrupted human societies and entered collective memory so traumatically that they were passed down through countless generations? The Younger Dryas period, lasting from approximately 12,800 to 11,600 years ago, represents one such event. After millennia of warming as the last ice age receded, temperatures suddenly plunged back toward glacial conditions. The cause remains debated. Perhaps massive freshwater influx from melting ice sheets disrupted ocean circulation, or perhaps comet impacts triggered climatic cooling through atmospheric dust. The effects were dramatic. Species went extinct. Vegetation patterns shifted radically. Sea levels, which had been rising as ice sheets melted, suddenly stabilized or even dropped slightly, then resumed rising as the cold period ended. Coastlines that had been inhabited were suddenly inundated. River systems changed courses. Landscapes people had known for generations became unrecognizable. For human populations adapted to specific environments, this would have been catastrophic. Hunter-gatherer bands dependent on particular resources would have faced starvation as ecosystems collapsed. Coastal settlements would have been forced to retreat as waters rose. The survivors would carry memories of when the waters came, and the old world drowned. By the time the Olmecs emerged around 1200 BCE, the Younger Dryas was ancient history, 7,000 years in the past. Yet oral traditions can persist for extraordinary lengths of time, especially when encoded in ritual, mythology, and sacred narratives passed from generation to generation by specialized memory keepers. Could Olmec flood imagery represent not contemporary experiences, but ancestral memories of that earlier catastrophe? The serpent, so prominent in their art, is often a water symbol. The undulating form recalls rivers and waves. The creature's association with rain links it to water's generative power. Were-jaguar figures sometimes appear to float or swim, suggesting aquatic contexts. Stone altars show rulers emerging from cave-like openings that some interpret as the mouths of the earth, but others see as water sources. Some researchers go further, proposing that civilization itself, the impulse toward settled life, agriculture, and monumental construction, arose partly as a response to climatic trauma. Before the Younger Dryas, Natufian people in the Levant had been experimenting with sedentary life and plant cultivation. The climate disruption may have intensified selective pressure, making systematic agriculture more necessary for survival and spreading this innovation as populations migrated. In this interpretation, agriculture, and eventually civilization, emerged not from plenty, but from scarcity, from the desperate need to ensure reliable food sources in a world grown unpredictable. The Olmecs developing agricultural civilization in Mesoamerica, 7,000 years later, were part of this long response to ancient trauma-building permanent settlements and monumental centers, as if to anchor themselves against the chaos that ancestral memory associated with environmental catastrophe. The flood myth might also represent something more symbolic, the universal human experience of impermanence. Water destroys, but it also creates. Floods wash away, but they also deposit fertile soil. The Olmec homeland, with its rivers constantly shifting course, its seasonal inundations transforming landscape into lakescape and back again, embodied this paradox. Every generation witnessed creation and destruction in cyclical rhythm. Perhaps the flood myths encoded not just historical memory, but philosophical understanding. The world is not permanent. Civilization is fragile. What is built can be unmade. Water, that most essential element, that giver of life, is also the great dissolver, the force that erodes even stone given sufficient time. The Olmecs built in response to this knowledge. Their colossal heads, carved from the hardest stone they could find, represented defiance of dissolution, an attempt to create something that water couldn't wash away, that time couldn't erase. Yet they also embraced water in their sacred geography, building Venta on a swamp island, constructing elaborate drainage systems, depicting water deities throughout their art. Comparative mythology reveals deeper patterns. The flood story often includes a few themes: divine dissatisfaction with humanity, destruction through water, survival of a righteous remnant, and the re-establishment of civilization on new foundations. These elements suggest the narrative served psychological and social functions beyond simple historical record. It explained catastrophe in moral terms. The flood came because humanity had strayed, had broken cosmic laws, had angered divine powers. This interpretation gave meaning to suffering and established the importance of proper ritual behavior. If catastrophe resulted from transgression, and correct action could prevent future disaster. The story thus reinforced social order and religious authority. It also provided hope. The world had ended before and been reborn. Survivors had rebuilt. Civilization could be renewed. This narrative would be particularly powerful for societies experiencing their own smaller-scale catastrophes, crop failures, warfare, political collapse. The ancient flood myth assured them that destruction was not final, that renewal was possible, that from chaos could emerge new order. Across the ocean, in the myths of the Near East, a similar pattern appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim survives the flood and gains immortality. In the biblical account, Noah preserves creation itself, saving paired animals to repopulate the earth. In Hindu tradition, Manu survives on a boat guided by a great fish. In Greek mythology, Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulate the world by throwing stones that become people. The details vary, but the core remains: catastrophic water, human survival, and renewal. The ubiquity suggests either that catastrophic flooding occurred in many regions, not unlikely given rising sea levels at the end of the ice age, or that the flood serves as such a powerful metaphor for disruption and renewal that it emerges independently in many cultures. For the Olmecs, living in a landscape dominated by water's dual nature, the flood myth would have resonated with immediate experience. They knew rivers could shift overnight, destroying fields and settlements. They knew tropical storms could drop apocalyptic amounts of rain, transforming solid ground into swamp. They knew that what seemed permanent, a riverbank, a village site, a ceremonial center, could be reclaimed by water in a single catastrophic season. Their response was characteristically ambitious. Build higher, build in stone, build with such mass and permanence that even floods become temporary inconveniences rather than existential threats. The Great Pyramid at Venta, The colossal heads, the massive stone thrones, all represented architecture scaled to survive. Yet they also knew the ultimate futility of resistance. Everything eventually returns to earth, is absorbed by jungle, is dissolved by rain. The ritual burial of monuments at San Lorenzo and La Venta, the careful toppling and interment of colossal heads, suggests they understood this truth. Better to surrender on your own terms, to complete the cycle deliberately, to transform ending into a kind of continuity. There's a haunting possibility that their flood myths weren't entirely about the distant past. Perhaps they also encoded presentiment of future disaster, an understanding that their civilization, too, would eventually drown, if not in water, then in time's more patient dissolution. And in a sense, they were right. The Olmec world ended. The cities fell silent. Rivers changed course. Jungle returned. For centuries, the monuments lay buried beneath soil and vegetation, as thoroughly drowned by earth as any Atlantis beneath ocean waves. But some things survived. The stone heads emerged again when farmers' tools struck basalt. The jade offerings remained green and luminous in their buried caches. The ideas, divine kingship, monumental architecture, ballgame ritual, celestial observation, floated to the surface of later civilizations like rescued treasures from a sunken world. The flood came, as floods always do, but the flood also receded. And what was built on stone foundations, what was carved into volcanic rock, what was encoded into cultural memory rather than merely recorded in perishable materials, these survived. The Olmecs understood water's power to destroy and create. They built accordingly, not to resist destruction, but to ensure that something essential would survive it, would emerge from the waters when they receded, would continue to speak across the drowning centuries. The stone remembers, even beneath the flood. In the limestone hills that rise at the edges of the Olmec heartland, there are caves. Not the obvious, gaping entrances that tourists visit, but narrow openings concealed by vegetation, known only to local people and the occasional archaeologist willing to follow obscure leads through jungle. In 2004, a team exploring one such cave system near the Olmec site of Chalcatzingo made a strange discovery. Deep within the cave, beyond where daylight penetrates, where the air grows close and damp, they found carved faces emerging from the stone walls. The faces were unmistakably Olmec in style, the distinctive features, the solemn expressions, the skilled carving technique. But what made this discovery particularly extraordinary was the acoustic property of the chamber. When the archaeologists spoke, their voices resonated strangely, amplified and echoed in ways that transformed ordinary speech into something otherworldly. A chant would multiply, filling the darkness with overlapping reverberations. A whisper would swell into a susurration that seemed to come from the stone itself. The acoustics weren't accidental. The chamber's shape, the position of the carvings, even the texture of specific rock surfaces suggested deliberate design. The Olmecs had chosen this space, or perhaps carved it, specifically for its sonic properties. Imagine the experience. Initiates led through darkness, following torchlight that creates dancing shadows on stone walls. As they descend deeper, the familiar world above falls away. Temperature drops. Air pressure changes. Disorientation sets in. Then, in the deepest chamber, they encounter the faces carved into living rock, gods or ancestors emerging from the underworld itself. The priest begins to chant. His voice multiplies, seems to come from every direction, from the stone, from the darkness, from inside the initiate's own heads. The boundary between self and environment dissolves. The faces seem to speak, their stone lips forming words that echo through the consciousness of all present. This is sensory manipulation of extraordinary sophistication. Modern researchers understand that certain acoustic frequencies, especially in enclosed spaces with specific resonance properties, can induce altered states of consciousness, what some describe as trance, others as spiritual experience, and neuroscientists explain as changes in brain activity triggered by auditory input. The Olmecs likely didn't understand the neuroscience, but they understood the effect. They knew that sound in certain spaces could transport consciousness, could make the supernatural feel tangibly present, could create experiences so powerful that individuals would emerge transformed, convinced they had encountered divine forces. Similar acoustic manipulation appears in sacred sites worldwide. The passage tombs of Newgrange in Ireland resonate at frequencies that modern studies show affect human consciousness. The temples of Malta incorporate acoustic properties that amplify certain vocal ranges. Even Gothic cathedrals, built millennia later, utilized architectural acoustics to create awe and transcendence. But there's something particularly profound about using natural caves. Unlike constructed buildings, caves are liminal spaces, neither fully of the surface world nor entirely separate from it. They're wounds in the earth, passages to the underworld, places where the living can approach the realm of the dead, the gods, the primordial forces that precede human existence. In Mesoamerican cosmology, caves held special significance. They were portals to Xibalba, the underworld. They were places where gods emerged at creation. They were sources of water, wind, and sometimes smoke or gas from volcanic vents. The earth's breath flowed through caves, making them literally animated spaces where divine presence could be felt. For the Olmecs to carve faces into cave walls, to conduct ceremonies in these resonant chambers, was to place their religious practice at the intersection of human and elemental powers. The faces watched from stone. The voices multiplied in darkness. The participants, stripped of familiar sensory orientation, became receptive to experiences that would fundamentally shape their understanding of reality. Some researchers speculate that the ritual use of these caves involved more than just acoustics. Certain caves show evidence of fires that would have consumed oxygen, producing altered consciousness through mild hypoxia. Others might have featured naturally occurring hallucinogenic gases from volcanic activity. Still others could have been sites where psychoactive plants, psilocybin mushrooms, morning glory seeds, tobacco, or other consciousness-altering substances were consumed as part of initiatory rituals. The combination would be overwhelming. Darkness, acoustic manipulation, possible hallucinogens, physical exhaustion from the journey through difficult cave passages, and the psychological weight of encountering sacred imagery in such an alien environment. Individuals would emerge genuinely transformed, having experienced something that felt utterly real, utterly supernatural, utterly beyond ordinary human consciousness. This transformation served social functions. Those who had experienced the cave ceremonies would form a bond, a shared understanding that separated initiates from the uninitiated. They would know secrets, not abstract theological concepts, but embodied knowledge gained through direct experience. This knowledge would mark them as different, qualified to hold authority, trusted to communicate with divine powers on behalf of the community. The caves were, in effect, consciousness technology, sophisticated methods for inducing specific psychological states that reinforced religious belief, validated power structures, and created cohesive social identity among elites. But beyond the anthropological analysis, there remains something genuinely mysterious about these singing caves. Stand in one, even now, even with electric light and modern equipment, and the space affects you. Your voice sounds strange. Echoes create patterns that feel meaningful, almost communicative. The faces carved into stone seem to watch with attention that's difficult to dismiss as mere projection. 3,000 years ago, in absolute darkness, broken only by flickering torchlight, with chanting multiplying through stone chambers and carved faces seeming to emerge from shadow, the experience must have been transcendent. The boundary between physical and spiritual would have seemed not just thin, but non-existent. The Olmecs understood something profound, that consciousness can be sculpted, that environments can induce specific experiences, that the sacred is not merely believed, but created through skillful manipulation of sensory input and psychological state. The caves still sing, the faces still watch, and occasionally someone descends into darkness and emerges changed, touched by something that feels like a voice from stone, an echo from the deep past, a whisper from the depths where the Olmecs once led their initiates and taught them to hear the earth speak. Among the most enigmatic Olmec artifacts are the mirrors, not ordinary reflective surfaces, but highly polished objects carved from magnetite and hematite, iron ores that could be ground and polished to create surfaces of astonishing reflectivity. Some are small, palm-sized concave discs that could have been worn as pendants. Others are larger, flat, or slightly curved surfaces that might have been held or mounted. When properly polished, these mirrors aren't merely reflective. They're startlingly clear, capable of producing sharp images even by modern standards. Creating such surfaces without metal tools would require extraordinary skill, patience, and knowledge of the material's properties. What were they for? The obvious answer is personal adornment or social display. A mirror was a luxury item, proof of wealth and access to skilled craftsmen. In a culture without modern glass, a polished stone surface that showed your own face with clarity would have been remarkable, almost magical. But archaeologists have proposed more intriguing possibilities. Some mirrors show evidence of having been mounted in frames or attached to other objects, suggesting they weren't merely held. Their placement in burial contexts often associates them with elite individuals, particularly those buried with astronomical or shamanic paraphernalia. This has led some researchers to propose that mirrors served ritual functions related to divination, spirit communication, or altered consciousness. Mirror gazing as a trance technique appears in many cultures. Sustained focus on a reflective surface, especially in dim light, can induce altered states of consciousness. The visual feedback creates psychological conditions conducive to hallucination, dissociation, or what practitioners interpret as spiritual vision. A shaman gazing into a polished mirror might see spirits, communicate with ancestors, or receive prophetic insights. But another possibility is more grounded in practical astronomy. These mirrors might have been used for celestial observation. Highly polished concave mirrors can reflect and concentrate light. They can be used to track the sun's position with precision, to observe Venus during its appearances as morning or evening star, even to project images of celestial objects for study. Flat mirrors can reflect sky positions, allowing an observer to view overhead objects while looking downward, a technique that reduces neck strain during extended observation. Some researchers have experimented with replica Olmec mirrors and found that they function surprisingly well as astronomical instruments. A polished magnetite disc can reflect the sun's image clearly enough to track its position throughout the day. It can capture star positions for mapping. It can even reflect the moon with sufficient clarity to observe its phases and surface features. If the Olmecs were serious astronomers, and the architectural alignments at Venta and other sites suggest they were, mirrors would have been valuable tools. They would allow observation without direct eye exposure to the sun's glare. They would permit comparison of celestial positions against terrestrial reference points. They would enable precise measurements of angular distances between celestial objects. Moreover, mirrors made from magnetite would have had an additional property. They would be slightly magnetic. An astronomer holding such a mirror might notice it tending to orient in particular directions, responding to Earth's magnetic field. This could have reinforced the belief that mirrors were conduits to supernatural forces, objects that responded to invisible cosmic influences. The use of mirrors in shamanic practice and astronomical observation aren't mutually exclusive. In Olmec worldview, there was likely no firm distinction between science and spirituality, between practical astronomy and religious ritual. The stars weren't distant balls of fusion-driven plasma, but gods, ancestors, or supernatural entities whose movements influence terrestrial events. To observe the sky was inherently a spiritual act, a form of communication with divine powers. Mirrors, then, would have served multiple overlapping functions. They were status symbols, proving access to rare materials and skilled craftsmanship. They were shamanic tools, facilitating trance states and spirit communication. They were astronomical instruments, enabling precise observation of celestial phenomena. And they were conceptual objects, surfaces that captured images without substance, boundaries between material and immaterial, thresholds where the visible and invisible met. The reflective quality itself would have carried symbolic weight. A mirror shows you yourself, creates a double, separates image from body. In traditions worldwide, reflections are associated with souls, spirits, or alternative selves. To gaze into a mirror might be to confront your own soul, to see yourself as God sees you, stripped of the assumptions and self-deceptions that ordinarily structure consciousness. For an Olmec ruler or priest gazing into polished magnetite, the experience would have been charged with multiple meanings. The reflected face might be their own, or it might be an ancestor, a god, a spirit waiting to communicate. The reflected sky might show mere clouds and stars, or it might reveal patterns that predicted floods, eclipses, wars, or the fates of kingdoms. Masks, too, played a related role. Olmec art features numerous depictions of individuals wearing elaborate masks, jade faces covering human faces, transforming the wearer into something other. Combined with mirrors, masks would create profound psychological effects. A masked shaman looking into a mirror would see not himself, but the god or ancestor he embodied, would experience literal visual confirmation of his transformation. This technology of the self, using physical objects to induce psychological states that validated belief systems and power structures, represents sophisticated understanding of how consciousness works. The Olmecs might not have had psychology as a formal discipline, but they understood that what you see affects what you believe, that transforming appearance can transform identity, that consciousness is malleable and responsive to environmental manipulation. Modern researchers occasionally experiment with these ancient technologies. When someone gazes into a highly polished Olmec-style mirror in dim light, especially after prolonged focus, they often report strange experiences. Faces seem to shift and morph, expressions change without the viewer moving. Sometimes entirely different faces seem to appear. These are recognized psychological phenomena: pareidolia, fatigue-induced hallucination, the brain's tendency to find patterns, especially in faces. But 3,000 years ago, these experiences would have been interpreted very differently. The shifting faces weren't hallucinations, but ancestors making themselves visible, gods revealing their presence, or the mirror showing past and future lives simultaneously. The experience would have validated cosmological beliefs, confirmed the reality of spiritual realms, and demonstrated the effectiveness of ritual techniques. The mirrors, like the singing caves, the magnetized stones, and the carefully aligned pyramids, reveal the Olmecs as masters of consciousness manipulation. They understood that reality as experienced is constructed through sensory input, psychological state, and cultural interpretation. They built an entire civilization around technologies, physical, architectural, and ritual, designed to produce specific experiences that reinforced their worldview. The astronomer's mask and the shaman's mirror might have been the same object, used differently depending on context, producing both practical astronomical data and profound spiritual experiences. In the Olmec universe, there was no contradiction between these functions. Both were ways of reading the cosmos, of communicating with powers beyond human control, of finding order in the vast complexity of existence. The mirrors no longer shine with their original brilliance. Oxidation, burial, and time have dulled most examples. But occasionally, when archaeologists carefully clean a newly discovered mirror, It returns to something approaching its original reflective quality. For a moment, across 3 millennia, you can see your face where an Olmec priest once saw his own, or saw gods, ancestors, stars, and mysteries we've forgotten how to perceive. There is a peculiar psychology to encountering the colossal heads. You expect to be impressed by their size, and you are. You anticipate appreciating their craftsmanship, and you do. But what you don't expect, what no photograph fully conveys, is the uncanny sensation that they're looking back at you. This isn't metaphor or romantic projection. Multiple visitors across decades, separated by culture and expectation, report the same experience. The heads feel aware, not alive precisely, but present in a way that goes beyond mere sculpture. Their eyes, carved with such anatomical precision, seem to track movement. Their expressions, solemn and contemplative, seem to shift subtly as you change position, as light and shadow play across basalt surfaces. Some of this is neuroscience. Humans are hyper-tuned to detect faces and interpret expressions. It's survival wiring, developed over millions of years of evolution. We find faces in clouds, in tree bark, in random patterns. When presented with an actual face, especially one so carefully rendered, our mirror neurons activate. We unconsciously empathize, projecting internal states onto the external form. But this explanation, while true, doesn't fully account for the emotional impact. The heads were designed to create this effect. The sculptors understood, whether through intuition or systematic observation, how to create presences that felt psychologically charged. The scale, the positioning, the anatomical precision, the expressions chosen, all work together to produce a specific experience in the viewer. In their original context, the effect would have been amplified. Imagine encountering these faces not in museums under fluorescent light, not roped off and explanatory labeled, but in their sacred plazas. You approach the ceremonial center, perhaps traveling for days. You're fasting, or you've consumed ritual substances that alter perception. You've been prepared through ceremonies that frame what you're about to experience in spiritual terms. Then you enter the plaza. The heads surround you, 8 feet tall, dozens of tons each, positioned at cardinal points or guarding sacred thresholds. They represent kings, ancestors, or gods. The distinction might be fluid in Olmec thought. They watch as you approach. You cannot avoid their gaze. You feel judged, witnessed, acknowledged by forces that transcend your individual existence. The psychological impact would be overwhelming. You would believe, at the level of embodied experience rather than abstract concept, that you stood in the presence of supernatural authority. The stone would feel animated because the entire context, ritual preparation, architectural framing, cultural narrative, and your own psychological state would make it so. This is ancestor presence encoded in permanent form. Many cultures believe ancestors remain involved in the living world, advising, judging, protecting, or punishing descendants based on whether they maintain proper practices. But most such beliefs involve invisible ancestors, present in spirit but not in form. The Olmecs made their ancestors visible. The colossal heads transformed belief into perception, made the metaphysical physical, gave weight and permanence to what other cultures could only imagine or represent in temporary forms. This had profound implications for social structure and political power. If the stone heads represent deceased rulers who continue to watch over the community, then current rulers are always under their gaze, always accountable to precedent. Political authority becomes continuous across generations, not merely inherited, but supervised by those who came before. For the population, the heads would serve as constant reminders that authority extends beyond individual human lives. You might resist a living king, but could you defy the accumulated weight of all previous kings, still watching from their basalt immortality? The heads made rebellion not just politically risky, but cosmically transgressive, an offense not against a single ruler, but against the entire lineage, against the ancestors, against the very foundation of cosmic order. Yet there's something else in their expressions, something that complicates the simple reading of them as authoritarian icons. Look closely at individual heads. Some seem stern, others contemplative. A few appear almost melancholic, as if bearing the weight of knowledge too heavy to easily carry. Their faces don't scream power. They whisper it with a restraint that suggests wisdom rather than mere dominance. Could these portraits be more personal than we typically assume? Perhaps they capture not generic rulership, but specific individuals, their personalities, their life experiences, their particular qualities as humans. Perhaps the sculptors were trying to preserve something essential about people they knew, worked with, or served. The heads would then be not just political propaganda, but memorial art, attempts to hold on to individuals who would otherwise be lost to time. If so, they succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. 3,000 years later, we still look into these faces and see persons, not just symbols or representations, but individuals who once breathed, thought, felt, made decisions that shaped their world. The basalt has preserved not just their features, but something of their presence, their being in the world, their particular way of inhabiting human consciousness. Modern research into memory and monuments suggests that the Olmec intuition was correct. Physical objects can encode and transmit memory across vast time spans. The heads function as external memory storage, like hard drives holding information beyond the capacity of any individual or oral tradition. They transmit not text or explicit information, but something more nebulous and perhaps more important, a sense of presence, continuity, and connection across time. When contemporary Maya or Nahuatl-speaking peoples visit Olmec sites, many report feeling connections to deep ancestry, recognition that these ruins represent foundational culture from which later traditions emerged. The stones serve as physical anchors for identity that extends back into depths of time where written history fades into myth and oral tradition. This isn't mysticism, but practical psychology. Memory requires anchors, triggers, physical embodiments. Family photos preserve memories of deceased relatives. Memorial monuments honor fallen soldiers. National museums house artifacts that encode collective identity. The Olmec heads perform similar functions, but at civilization scale and across millennia. They are collective memory frozen in basalt, waiting patiently for people to remember how to read them, to recognize in their gaze not alien others, but ancestors whose concerns, maintaining order, ensuring continuity, connecting human present to cosmic eternal, aren't so different from our own. The great tragedy is how much memory has been lost. We can see their faces, but can't hear their names. We can appreciate their expressions, but can't access the stories those faces evoked for people who stood before them in ancient plazas. The heads preserve presence, but not context, form, but not narrative. Yet perhaps even fragmented memory serves a purpose. The heads, stripped of their original meanings, become vessels for new meanings. They remind us of civilization's impermanence, of how even the mightiest works fall silent, of how stone outlasts empire and dynasty, and everything we build upon foundations we think eternal. And in their patient watching, they pose a question: what will remain of us? 3,000 years from now, what traces will testify that we existed, that we built, that we carved meaning from stone and tried to make it permanent? The Olmec heads answer with their presence. Build in stone, build large, build with care that transcends temporary political goals. Build to communicate across time to peoples who will speak different languages, worship different gods, live in utterly transformed contexts, but who will still recognize in carved basalt the essential human impulse to matter, to leave something behind, to say, "We were here," in a voice that carries across the millennia. The memory persists. In stone. Night falls again on Veracruz, as it has fallen for 3,000 years. The tourist groups have departed. The archaeologists have returned to their lodgings. The security guard makes his rounds and settles in his small shelter, watching the shadows. The colossal heads stand in darkness. Moonlight catches their profiles, creates sharp contrasts between light and shadow that transform familiar features into something strange, almost alien. A breeze moves through nearby trees, creating whispers that sound almost like voices, almost like the murmur of crowds in ancient plazas, almost like language is dead for millennia, but not quite silent. This is the time when even skeptics feel it. The weight of presence, the sense of being observed, the uncanny recognition that these are not merely sculptures, but something more. Not alive, but not entirely inert. Not conscious, but not without agency. They exist in that strange category that human language struggles to capture. Objects that have absorbed so much human attention, intention, and meaning that they seem to radiate something back. In their original context, the heads never stood alone like this. They were surrounded by people, priests conducting ceremonies, rulers making proclamations, commoners bringing offerings, children playing in plazas, vendors selling food, musicians performing, dancers moving in ritual patterns. The heads watched all of it, anchoring the human activity, providing continuity between ceremonies, connecting the present moment to accumulated history. Now they watch emptiness. The plazas are silent. The crowds have been dust for 2.5 millennia. The rituals are forgotten. The songs are unsung. Yet the heads remain, still watching, still waiting, still performing their function, even though there's nothing left to watch but jungle, tourists, and time. What are they, really? They're portraits, yes, of specific individuals who once lived, ruled, and died. They're political art, expressions of authority designed to command respect and reinforce hierarchy. They're religious objects, representations of divine or semi-divine beings with supernatural authority. They're feats of engineering, proof that the Olmecs could move mountains when they chose to. But they're also something we don't have good vocabulary for. Material embodiments of collective intentionality. Thousands of people participated in creating each head, quarrying the stone, transporting it across impossible distances, carving with patient precision, positioning with ceremonial care. Tens of thousands more encountered them across centuries, projecting meanings, telling stories, conducting rituals, creating the cultural context that transformed rock into Rex. All that human activity didn't vanish when the Olmec civilization fell. It's encoded in the object itself, not literally, not in any way modern science can measure, but real nonetheless. The heads are palimpsests written over by countless encounters, each viewer adding another layer of meaning, another interpretation, another emotional response that becomes part of what the object is. Stand before one in darkness, and you're encountering not just basalt, but all those accumulated encounters. This stone has absorbed 3,000 years of human attention and reflects it back at you. That's why they feel aware, because in a very real sense, they are. Not with individual consciousness, but with the weight of collective recognition that transformed them from stone to symbol. Indigenous peoples living near Olmec sites sometimes describe the heads differently than archaeologists do. They're not artifacts, but entities, beings that exist in a category between human and geological. They're not quite ancestors, but not simply rock either. They should be approached with respect, addressed properly, understood as continuing participants in the world, rather than mere remnants of a dead civilization. This isn't superstition, but a sophisticated understanding of how meaning persists in objects. The heads do function differently than ordinary stone. They concentrate attention, evoke responses, connect present to past in ways that raw basalt boulders don't. To recognize this is to acknowledge a reality that materialism struggles to account for, that human meaning-making leaves traces that persist beyond individual lives, beyond civilizations, beyond the contexts that originally generated them. In the night, the heads seem most themselves. Removed from the explanatory frameworks of daylight, freed from tourism and academic analysis, they simply exist, vast, silent, patient. Their expressions, which seem fixed in daylight, appear to shift. A shadow moves, and suddenly a stern face looks contemplative. Moonlight brightens, and a solemn expression gains a hint of amusement. The eyes, always the eyes, seem to track movement, to hold gaze, to acknowledge those who stand before them. Psychology explains this as pareidolia, pattern recognition, the human tendency to anthropomorphize. All true, but the experience remains, regardless of explanation. The heads achieve what their creators intended. They command presence. They focus attention. They connect viewers to something larger than individual existence. Modern people, standing before these faces in the night, often report profound experiences. A sense of connection to deep time, to the vast sweep of human endeavor across millennia. An awareness of how briefly individual lives flicker compared to the patient endurance of stone. A humbling recognition of how much has been forgotten, how many civilizations have risen and fallen, how precarious our own moment is. Others feel something more specific, a presence, an attention, a watching that feels personal rather than general. They describe it as the heads choosing to reveal themselves, allowing the viewer to see not just stone, but the individuals the stone represents. These experiences are subjective, unrepeatable, impossible to verify, yet remarkably consistent across different people in different circumstances. What are we to make of this? Either thousands of people across decades are experiencing the same illusion, or the heads genuinely do something to consciousness, not through supernatural means, but through the accumulated weight of their existence, their craftsmanship, their positioning, and their role as focus points for human meaning-making across enormous time spans. Perhaps the distinction doesn't matter. Whether the experience originates in the object or in the viewer's consciousness, it's real in its effects. People leave changed. They think about time differently. They consider legacy, civilization, and impermanence with new awareness. They connect to a sense of human continuity that transcends culture, language, and millennium. The heads accomplish this without words, without explanation, without the need for interpretive frameworks. They do it simply by existing, by being so thoroughly what they are that they become undeniable. Stone faces, watching in the dark. Silent witnesses to everything that has passed and everything yet to come. As moonlight moves across the plaza, the shadows shift again. The faces seem to breathe, seem to move in peripheral vision, seem almost to whisper in a language that predates words. And those who watch them, archaeologists, tourists, guards, and occasionally someone who has come seeking answers to questions they can't quite articulate, feel the weight of that gaze. The stone heads of the Olmecs were never meant to answer questions. They were meant to provoke them, to generate wonder, to create encounters with mystery that would resonate through lives and generations. In this, they succeed perfectly. 3,000 years later, in darkness, under stars the Olmecs, mapped in myths they told, the faces continue their work, watching, waiting, remembering, dreaming in stone. In the end, we return to the beginning. Night in the jungle, stone faces emerging from mist and shadow, the patient gaze of monuments that have outlasted the civilization that created them. What have we learned following the trail of the Olmecs from their rise in San Lorenzo, through their zenith at La Venta, to their dispersal into successor cultures? What do we truly understand about these people who carved gods into jade, moved mountains of basalt, and laid the foundations for 3,000 years of Mesoamerican civilization? We know the objective facts, dates, sites, artifacts, archaeological contexts. We know they flourished from roughly 1200 to 400 BCE. We know they built monumental centers, developed long-distance trade networks, created sophisticated art, and influenced every culture that followed them. We know they worked in a challenging tropical environment with Stone Age technology and achieved results that still inspire awe. But beyond the facts lies something less quantifiable, a sensibility, a way of engaging with existence that the stone heads embody but don't explain. The Olmecs understood impermanence. They lived in a world where rivers shifted course, where floods could erase settlements overnight, where jungle reclaimed anything left unattended. They knew that flesh fails, that memory fades, that even the strongest society eventually crumbles. This awareness permeates their art, the solemn expressions on colossal heads, the emphasis on transformation in their iconography, the practice of ritually burying monuments when power shifted. Yet they also believed in continuity. They carved the hardest stone available. They positioned monuments according to celestial alignments that had persisted since creation and would persist beyond human reckoning. They developed timekeeping systems that measured days across vast spans. They created art so distinctive that it echoes through millennia. This paradox, acute awareness of impermanence combined with commitment to permanence, defines the Olmec achievement. They built not from naive optimism that their works would last forever, but from mature understanding that building is what humans do, that creating meaning is how we participate in existence, that the act of shaping stone matters regardless of how long the stone endures. We see this same understanding in how they ended their civilization. The careful burial of monuments, the deliberate toppling and interment of colossal heads, the ritual closing of ceremonial centers. These weren't acts of destruction, but of completion. They recognized when cycles ended and honored those endings rather than clinging desperately to forms that had outlived their function. There's wisdom in this that speaks across millennia to our own moment. We live in an age obsessed with permanence, digitally archiving every moment, constructing databases intended to last forever, anxious about legacy and impact. Yet we also witness accelerating change, the collapse of institutions that seemed eternal, the realization that nothing, not ideas, not technologies, not civilizations, persists unchanged. The Olmecs offer a different model. Build well, build meaningfully, build in alignment with principles larger than individual ego, but release attachment to outcomes. The Stoneheads don't announce we ruled forever, but rather we were here, we mattered, we shaped stone with care and intention. And what becomes of our work is beyond our control. This acceptance doesn't breed passivity, but focus. If you know your civilization will eventually fall, you don't waste energy on frantic preservation. Instead, you concentrate on making what you build worth building, on creating from authentic vision rather than mere desire for immortality. The Olmec gods, the were-jaguar, the rain deity, the feathered serpent, all emphasize transformation. They're hybrid beings, existing between categories, representing the constant flux that characterizes reality. To worship such deities is to acknowledge that change is not aberration but essence, that existence means constant transformation through which some essential pattern persists. What persisted from the Olmecs? Not their political structures, their languages, or even their name, but something else transmitted successfully. Ways of organizing sacred space, concepts of divine kingship, artistic motifs that proved endlessly adaptable, astronomical knowledge that enabled sophisticated calendrical systems, and perhaps most importantly, an attitude toward civilization itself. The understanding that culture is something you build with care, celebrate fully, and eventually release. Every Mesoamerican culture that followed inherited and adapted these patterns. The Maya took Olmec foundations and built towering intellectual achievements in mathematics, writing, and astronomy. The Zapotecs developed their own monumental centers using Olmec architectural principles. The Aztecs, 2,000 years removed, still honored the ancient homeland as sacred, still collected Olmec artifacts as treasures, still recognized they stood within a tradition that stretched back into mythical time. And us? What do we inherit from the Olmecs? Not direct cultural descent. They're not our ancestors in any biological or social sense. But we inherit questions they asked and their example in addressing them. How do we create meaning that transcends individual lives? How do we mark our passage through time? How do we build in ways that honor both ambition and humility? How do we accept impermanence while still committing fully to creation? The colossal heads, standing watch across centuries, embody these questions. They're not answers but provocations, not statements but koans that each generation must wrestle with anew. Stand before them, and you feel time differently. The present moment becomes one bead on an endless string of moments, each inhabited by humans who felt as immediate and important as you do now, all of whom vanished while their monuments endured. This awareness could be crushing, could reduce present concerns to meaningless trivia before the vastness of deep time. But the heads don't communicate despair. Their expressions are serious, but not tragic, solemn, but not despairing. They watched their civilization pass and continued watching. They've observed 2,500 years of history since the Olmecs fell silent. They'll watch whatever comes next. Their persistence offers not the false comfort of permanent solutions, but the genuine consolation of pattern and repetition. Civilizations rise and fall, but the impulse towards civilization recurs. Empires crumble, but the desire to build, to create, to matter resurfaces. Languages die, but new languages emerge. Gods are forgotten, but new gods are born from the same fundamental human needs that created the old ones. The stone remembers not specific events, but essential patterns. It remembers that humans create, that we cannot help but make meaning, that we perpetually transform raw material, stone, clay, sound, word, into vessels for significance. It remembers that this activity persists regardless of outcome, that the act of creation is not justified by permanence, but by the deep human need to participate in shaping reality. The jungle hums around the monuments. Stars wheel overhead in patterns the Olmecs charted, but which preceded them by eons and will continue when humanity is itself archaeological residue. Rivers flow toward the sea, depositing soil that will eventually bury even the colossal heads deeper than current excavation reveals. Everything transforms. Nothing is lost. Matter and meaning both persist, cycling through forms, carrying forward patterns that connect past to future in ways we partially understand and mostly sense intuitively. The Olmecs knew this. They built accordingly, large enough to endure for centuries, meaningful enough to inspire millennia, but without the desperate grasping that comes from believing permanence is possible. Their monuments watch still, not in judgment, but in witness, not demanding anything, but offering presence, not speaking, but somehow communicating across the vast silence of dead languages and forgotten names. The stone remembers. Not everything. Memory in stone is not like memory in consciousness. But something persists, the weight of human intention, the trace of careful craft, the echo of meanings that have transformed beyond recognition, but never quite vanished. We stand before these faces, separated by 3,000 years, and everything that distance implies, different languages, different gods, different technologies, different contexts. Yet something connects across that gulf. We recognize in their solemn gaze our own face reflected, our own questions about meaning and mortality, our own drive to create something that matters beyond individual existence. The Olmecs are gone, their civilization ended, their gods transformed into other gods or faded entirely, their language dissolved into silence. But the stone heads remain, patient and vast and inexplicably moving. They teach what they were carved to teach, that humans build, that civilizations rise and fall, that stone outlasts empire, that meaning persists even when specific contents are lost, that the act of careful creation is its own justification regardless of outcome. In the darkness between moonset and dawn, when light is most uncertain and shadows most profound, the faces seem most alive, not moving, but present, not speaking, but somehow still eloquent, still watching as they've watched through all the centuries since their carvers laid down their tools and walked away, leaving the faces to stand guard over a future they could never imagine, but somehow prepared for. The stone remembers, and in its remembering we find our own continuation, not of specific forms, but of the eternal human pattern. Create, intend, build, release. Honor both ambition and acceptance. Make marks that matter, then let them transform as they will. The jungle will reclaim the stones. Eventually. Not yet. Not today. Today they watch. They wait. They remember in their stone way all that has been and all that will be. And we, passing through our brief moment, can choose to add our witness to theirs, acknowledging the mystery that the Olmecs knew. That consciousness is brief, but stone is patient, that meaning is made and lost and remade endlessly, that to build with care is enough, that to create is to participate in cycles larger in comprehension. The stone faces of the Olmecs watch still, in darkness and in light, through seasons and centuries. Silent witnesses to the vast turning of time, the patient unfolding of cosmic patterns, and the eternally renewed human impulse to shape meaning from stone. They endure, they remember, they dream, and the jungle hums its endless song around them, neither mourning nor celebrating, simply continuing as stone continues, as time continues, as the great cycles turn and all things transform, while somehow remaining essentially themselves. The Olmecs understood. The stone remembers. And we, inheriting their questions if not their answers, stand amazed before faces that have looked out upon the world far longer than any empire has endured, longer than any language has been spoken, longer than most of what we call civilization has existed. They are the Olmecs' gift to deep time, not explanations, but presence. Not answers, but magnificent questions carved in basalt, watching, waiting, dreaming in stone.